The morning sun glinted off the polished steps of the Hawthorne Federal Courthouse, casting long shadows that stretched across the empty plaza. A woman moved calmly through the entrance, her stride deliberate, unhurried, and confident. She was dressed in civilian clothes, unassuming to anyone who didn't know her, but there was an unmistakable aura about her, something that drew the eyes of anyone paying attention. Officer Daniel Cross was stationed at the courthouse entrance, clipboard in hand, radio buzzing at his side. He had been briefed about unauthorized personnel entering the building that morning. As she approached, something in his instincts set off alarm bells. The woman's demeanor was composed, almost imperious. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called, his voice authoritative but tinged with suspicion. "Can I see some ID?" The woman paused and looked at him steadily. "Of course," she replied, her voice calm, even, but carrying a subtle weight that made Cross hesitate. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather credential wallet. The gold-embossed seal gleamed in the morning light. Cross squinted at it, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar insignia. But instead of examining it carefully, Cross made a snap judgment. "Step aside. You're not authorized to be here," he barked. His tone was sharp, bordering on aggressive. The woman's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in a quiet acknowledgement of what was about to unfold. "I think you may want to reconsider that, Officer Cross," she said, her voice firm yet measured. "I am here on official business." Cross's hand drifted toward his radio, signaling backup. He had made up his mind. He was going to enforce what he thought was the law, regardless of the woman's protest. The moment was tense, a collision of authority and misunderstanding. "I said step aside," Cross repeated, louder this time, his patience gone. The woman, Judge Elena Mercer, as she would later reveal, stood her ground. She raised her hands slightly, a gesture meant to de-escalate, but it was ignored. Cross lunged forward, grabbing her arm. The suddenness of the movement startled everyone nearby, including a clerk emerging from the courthouse doors. "Hey, let go." Judge Mercer's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge. Her words fell on deaf ears. Cross, already convinced of his righteous authority, shoved her backward. The push caught her off guard, her head snapping slightly, but she maintained her footing. Backup officers began to arrive, sensing the confrontation escalating. "Hands behind your back," one of them shouted. Judge Mercer, despite the shock and indignation, complied, but there was no fear in her movements, only controlled determination. As handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she addressed Cross directly. "You should know, officer, that you are making a grave mistake." Her voice was measured, precise, each word weighted with authority. Cross sneered. "Yeah, right. Like I'm supposed to know who you are." Another entitled activist trying to play games. Inside the courthouse, murmurs began to spread. People emerging for early hearings stopped in their tracks, drawn by the commotion. Few could believe what they were witnessing. A seemingly ordinary woman, calmly being restrained while the officer's tone bordered on hostile. At that moment, a young law clerk, Mara Bennett, watched from the gallery. Something about the woman, her composure, the way she carried herself, felt eerily familiar. She leaned forward, curiosity and unease intertwining. Judge Mercer's eyes scanned the approaching officers calmly, cataloging each face, each movement. She spoke again, softly but deliberately. "All actions have consequences, Officer Cross. All of them." The words hung in the air, unnoticed by most, but piercing to those who listened carefully. Cross wasn't listening. He was too focused on asserting control, on proving his authority. "Get her to the holding room," he barked. As she was led away, Judge Mercer's mind worked swiftly, processing every step, every potential piece of evidence. The courthouse's security cameras, the officers' body cams, their radios, all of it would be crucial. She knew the system better than anyone, and she knew the law even better. Once in the holding room, the officers began discussing among themselves, unaware of the storm they had triggered. "You think she's really someone important?" one whispered. "She didn't look like a judge to me." Judge Mercer, sitting calmly, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Importance is not always visible, and authority isn't always recognized until it's too late, she murmured to herself. Meanwhile, Officer Cross had already begun recounting the story to his colleagues, framing it as a heroic intervention against a supposed unauthorized intruder. What he didn't realize was that he had underestimated his target completely. Judge Mercer's phone buzzed. Her clerk, frantic, had been trying to reach her. She tapped out a quick reply. "Mara, don't worry about Peterson hearing. I'll handle this. Clear my schedule. Justice needs me." In the courtroom, Cross and the other officers prepared their statements, believing they had control. They didn't know that Judge Mercer was already calculating her next moves. She had been planning quietly for months. Patterns of misconduct, racial bias, procedural abuse, all of it had been documented, reviewed, and prepared for the moment when the law itself would speak. The courthouse hum was now filled with tension. When she finally returned to the courtroom in her full judicial robes, the narrative would flip entirely. The predator would become the defendant. The arbitrator of justice would reclaim her authority. And Officer Cross would soon learn a truth he had never anticipated, that the law is blind, but justice, when wielded by someone who understands its full weight, is anything but passive. Judge Mercer's calm, deliberate breathing in the holding room was the eye of the storm. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Every movement, every word, every decision she would make in the coming hours was a calculated step toward accountability. This was more than personal vindication. It was a reckoning. And from the quiet of that holding room, the courthouse would never be the same. The courtroom buzzed faintly as the clock crept toward mid-morning. Spectators had begun filing in, curious whispers spreading like wildfire about the incident outside. Inside the holding room, Judge Elena Mercer straightened her back, her eyes focused, her mind sharp. The handcuffs were temporary, a minor inconvenience. What mattered now was control, the kind of control that only comes from understanding the law in its fullest depth. Bailiff Thomas Reed approached cautiously, his face pale but resolute. He had worked in the courthouse for over a decade and had served under Judge Mercer for the past 15 years. Recognition flickered in his eyes, growing into horror as the realization hit him. The woman being detained was the very judge he had seen preside over countless hearings, the judge who had overseen his career in ways both professional and inspiring. "Your Honor," Reed whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't recognize you in civilian clothes. They brought you in like any other suspect." Judge Mercer's expression softened, but her voice remained calm and commanding. "It's all right, Thomas. This isn't your fault. I need your help, though." Reed nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Anything, Your Honor. Just tell me what you need." She looked him in the eye, her tone unwavering. "I need my judicial robes, the black ones with gold trim, and my gavel, the ceremonial one for my swearing-in. We are about to return to the courtroom, and I want everyone to understand exactly who they're dealing with." Without another word, Reed hurried away, leaving Judge Mercer alone to gather her thoughts. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, centering herself. For the past 23 years, she had served as a federal judge, and in all that time, she had seen injustice, abuse of authority, and systemic corruption. She had learned to navigate the nuances of the law, to anticipate the moves of those who would abuse their power. In the corridor outside the holding room, Officer Daniel Cross and his colleagues were patting themselves on the back. In their eyes, the situation was controlled. They didn't realize that the woman they had restrained was no ordinary civilian. They didn't see the decades of legal experience, the meticulous preparation, the intelligence that had been quietly observing them. Within minutes, Reed returned carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box. "Your robes, Your Honor, and the gavel." Judge Mercer took the garments with the grace of someone reclaiming a throne. She slipped into her judicial robes, feeling the weight of authority settle on her shoulders. The ceremonial gavel fit perfectly in her hand, its engraved words catching the morning light. "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She paused to study herself in the small mirror in the holding room. The bruise on her cheek from the earlier altercation was still visible, but it no longer represented weakness. It was evidence, a symbol of the system she was about to hold accountable. Returning to the courtroom, every eye snapped to attention as she entered through the judge's chamber door. The full weight of her presence, the flowing black robes, the gold trim, the ceremonial gavel, transformed the atmosphere instantly. It was as if the room itself had been reshaped by authority. Bailiff Reed's voice echoed with commanding clarity. "All rise. Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Elena Mercer presiding. The effect was immediate. Officer Cross, who had moments before been smug with confidence, went pale. His knees weakened, and he stumbled slightly as the reality hit him. The woman he had assaulted wasn't just any citizen. She was the very embodiment of the law, the person whose authority he had chosen to ignore. Judge Mercer's gaze swept across the courtroom, landing on the flustered prosecutor, Sandra Blake. Blake's papers shook slightly in her hands, the magnitude of the situation dawning on her. The defense attorneys whispered urgently to their clients, trying to process the unprecedented reversal. "Officer Cross," Judge Mercer began, her voice cold, crisp, yet entirely controlled. "Approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this very courtroom. Do you recall your statements?" Cross's mouth opened, then closed, his voice failing him. He nodded weakly, eyes darting toward the exits as though escape might be possible. "Allow me to refresh your memory," Judge Mercer continued, pacing slowly behind the bench. "You stated that individuals entering this courthouse without apparent authorization often claim to be judges, lawyers, or officials, anything to avoid accountability. You described me this morning using terms like uppity and implied I was another activist attempting to game the system. Do you remember saying that?" Cross's lips quivered. "Why, yes, Your Honor. And further," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "you told this court that people like me need to learn that actions have consequences." "You were correct, but Officer Cross, today those words apply to you." The courtroom fell silent. The faint hum of the air conditioning sounded deafening in the tense room. Every reporter, lawyer, and clerk was leaning forward, captivated by the unfolding spectacle. Judge Mercer then raised her gavel, pointing to a tablet she held in her other hand. "Let's review some evidence, shall we?" The screen lit up, displaying crystal-clear footage from multiple courthouse security cameras. The video showed her walking calmly toward the courthouse, Officer Cross intercepting her, the unprovoked shove, the grab, the handcuffing, all of it. Her voice in the recording was calm, measured, unthreatening, while Cross's words dripped with hostility and bias. Gasps echoed around the room as the evidence played. The officer's body cam footage appeared next, including backup files Cross had claimed malfunctioned. The reality was undeniable. His actions had been deliberate, aggressive, and racially motivated. Judge Mercer's tone remained steady. "Officer Cross, you've testified about your professionalism this morning. After reviewing the video and your own body cam recordings, do you still stand by your statements?" Cross shook, unable to form words. The courtroom watched, riveted. Even the gallery murmured with disbelief and horror at the contrast between his claims and reality. "Let's hear from your colleagues," Judge Mercer continued. "Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, both of you attested to Officer Cross's professionalism. Do you wish to amend your statements?" The two officers exchanged nervous glances. "No, Your Honor," Rodriguez stammered, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. The tablet displayed audio from Thompson's functioning body cam, capturing a conversation while Cross assaulted Judge Mercer. Their laughter, their casual discussion of her identity, their dismissive remarks about the seriousness of the situation. Every word, every sound was evidence. Judge Mercer paused, letting the courtroom absorb the magnitude of the betrayal. "Officer Cross," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "you assaulted a federal judge, under color of law, based explicitly on bias and personal prejudice. You then lied under oath. Actions, Officer Cross. Consequences. Today they are yours." Cross slumped in his chair, panic overtaking him. The defense attorney frantically whispered suggestions. But Judge Mercer was unyielding. This courtroom will not tolerate misconduct, deception, or abuse. And you, Officer Cross, have exemplified all three. Turning back to the gallery, Judge Mercer's voice carried to every corner. This is not merely about one individual. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring that no badge, no title, no position can shield a person from the law. Bailiff Reed moved to her side, a silent guardian, ready to support her command of the courtroom. She lifted her gavel again, signaling the gravity of the next steps. Court will recess briefly, she instructed, her voice firm. When we return, we will address the full scope of Officer Cross's misconduct, review his career record, and discuss the consequences of a system that has allowed unchecked abuse for far too long. As the courtroom emptied into murmurs of shock and whispered conversations, Mara Bennett, the young law clerk, remained seated, notebook in hand, absorbing every detail. She had witnessed a reckoning that would define her career and her life. Judge Mercer took a quiet breath, the calm before the storm. She knew what awaited her when court resumed. Evidence would be presented, patterns of abuse exposed, and the full weight of the law would descend upon those who had believed themselves untouchable. And this was only the beginning. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as everyone returned from the brief recess. The spectators, reporters, and court staff had barely processed the chaos of the morning, yet they sensed that the real reckoning was just beginning. Judge Elena Mercer returned to her bench, her robes flowing around her like the armor of justice itself. Her gavel rested firmly in her hand, a symbol of authority and unwavering resolve. Officer Daniel Cross shifted nervously in the defendant's chair. His uniform, now rumpled and creased, did little to maintain the illusion of control. The earlier shock had left him pale and trembling. For the first time in his career, he understood the magnitude of what he had done and the consequences that were about to follow. Officer Cross, Judge Mercer began, her voice calm, yet piercing. You assaulted a federal judge this morning while she was performing her official duties. But that act, while shocking, is only a fraction of the story. Today, we will examine not just what you did in this courthouse, but your entire career spanning 15 years of sworn service. The courtroom shifted, leaning forward in anticipation. Prosecutor Sandra Blake's hands were steady now, but her eyes betrayed the enormity of the unfolding case. She had never seen such an unprecedented reversal, an officer on trial before the very judge he had assaulted. Judge Mercer opened a thick manila folder, her gaze sharp. Officer Cross, according to records from the Internal Affairs Division, you have been the subject of 47 formal complaints during your career. 47. That averages to over 3 complaints per year. Each one alleges abuse of power, racial bias, or misconduct. Let's start with complaint number 1, filed in 2009 by Mrs. Clara Rodriguez, a 72-year-old retiree. She claimed you called her derogatory names during a traffic stop and pushed her against her car when she questioned your authority. The investigation concluded unsubstantiated. Cross swallowed hard, his lips trembling. Judge Mercer's voice remained unwavering. Complaint number 12, 2012, involved Jamal Thornton, a 16-year-old honor student. He alleged that you planted evidence after refusing to provide information about a relative. The department once again dismissed the complaint as unsubstantiated. The courtroom murmured at the pattern emerging. Journalists scribbled furiously. Clerks glanced at one another, eyebrows raised. Complaint 23, 2016, Judge Mercer continued. Dr. Michael Johnson, a prominent physician, was arrested outside his home. His only crime? Existing in a neighborhood you deemed off-limits for black residents. 6 hours in jail, no charges filed. Dismissed as unsubstantiated. Cross's breathing became shallow. He muttered something under his breath, but Judge Mercer ignored him, her focus on the courtroom, on the message that needed to be delivered. Do you see a pattern, Officer Cross? She asked, pacing slowly behind her bench. 28 of your complaints involved African American or Hispanic citizens. 26 of those cases involved you as the arresting officer. And in every instance, Your language and behavior mirror the vitriol you displayed this morning. Chief Judge Margaret Carter, who had quietly entered the front row earlier, took meticulous notes. She had never witnessed a federal judge orchestrate such a direct confrontation of systemic abuse. Every person in the room felt the weight of history being made. Judge Mercer flipped to a large chart on an easel, displaying arrest statistics and demographic breakdowns. Of your 1,089 arrests involving people of color, nearly 40% were later dismissed for lack of evidence, prosecutorial error, or violation of constitutional rights. Your use of force reports show physical force in 63% of these arrests, compared to only 12% in arrests of white suspects. Officer Cross, what you have done is not just misconduct. It is a pattern of criminal behavior, a career built on abuse and prejudice. The defense attorney's face turned ashen. He scribbled frantically, trying to formulate a defense against irrefutable data, while Cross slumped further into his chair, realizing that the walls of protection he had relied on for years were crumbling. Judge Mercer's voice grew colder. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Let's examine the financial impact. Over 15 years, the county has paid out $2.3 million in settlements related to your conduct. $2.3 million, Officer Cross. Money that could have funded schools, community programs, or public services. Instead, it paid for your unchecked aggression. The courtroom reacted audibly. Spectators gasped, reporters whispered, and Blake's pen moved faster, capturing every damning statistic. Judge Mercer paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she continued. And let us not forget the human cost. The families terrorized by your actions, the teenagers wrongly detained, the elderly frightened by your authority, the professionals accused unjustly. Every single one of them silenced by a system that allowed officers like you to operate with impunity. Her gavel rested in her palm, the polished wood gleaming. Officer Cross, today you face not just the consequences of a single act, but of 15 years of willful disregard for the law you swore to uphold. She turned to the gallery, addressing every person in the courtroom. This is what happens when someone believes a badge places them above justice. This is the result when complaints are ignored, investigations dismissed, and abuses protected. Today, we are reversing that tide. Today, justice begins to correct itself. Judge Mercer's tone shifted slightly, moving from cold authority to deliberate storytelling. Now, Officer Cross, let's review the recordings you provided under the pretense of malfunctioning equipment. Each body cam file, every backup recording, paints a clear picture. The assault you committed this morning was deliberate, violent, and fueled by bias. Your own colleague's audio, laughing as you violated the law, confirms the culture of impunity in your department. The gallery remained captivated. Some could not bear to look at Cross. Others scribbled notes for articles, blogs, and reports. The story unfolding before them was more than courtroom drama. It was a case study in accountability, courage, and institutional reform. Judge Mercer stepped closer to the defendant, her voice dropping to a quiet, cutting tone. Do you understand, Officer Cross, the severity of what you have done? You assaulted a federal judge. You perjured yourself under oath. And in doing so, you have revealed a pattern of systemic abuse that have persisted for years. Cross's eyes darted, searching the room for mercy that would not come. His defense attorney whispered again, but Judge Mercer did not flinch. There is no defense for the years of unchecked power, the dismissal of complaints, or the terror inflicted on the innocent. You are about to face the consequences of both your actions this morning and your decades-long career of misconduct. Turning to the evidence table, Judge Mercer gestured to the files detailing the 47 complaints. Each of these represents a life disrupted, a citizen harmed, a system misused. You claimed you were simply doing your job. Doing your job, Officer Cross, does not include assaulting the innocent, targeting people based on their race, or lying under oath. That is not law enforcement. That is abuse. Her voice rose, filling every corner of the courtroom. And today, Officer Cross, the law will no longer ignore your abuses. You are not just accountable for one act. You are accountable for 15 years of documented misconduct. This is what justice looks like when it is served without fear, without bias, without compromise. Judge Mercer's gaze swept the room. Reporters leaned forward, spectators held their breath, and every officer present, those who had believed in their own invincibility, felt a chill. Court will recess briefly, she concluded, her tone unwavering. And when we return, we will begin the formal pronouncement of charges and sentences. Every person wronged by Officer Cross will finally see justice. Every dismissed complaint, every ignored plea will be considered. The law does not forget, and neither do I. As the courtroom emptied, Mara Bennett, the young clerk, remained seated, notebook full of observations. Her eyes shone with determination. She had witnessed courage and accountability in action. She knew that today would be remembered for generations, a day when one federal judge took a stand and redefined what it meant to protect the powerless. Judge Mercer lingered for a moment, looking at the empty defendant's chair. The gavel rested in her hand, an instrument of authority and truth. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself. "The beginning of justice served and the end of unchecked power." The silence of the courtroom that followed was not uncomfortable. It was reverent, the calm before the storm, and the storm was about to hit. The courtroom was silent as everyone returned from recess, the anticipation almost tangible in the air. Officer Daniel Cross sat slumped in the defendant's chair, a man whose once commanding presence had been reduced to trembling uncertainty. His career, his reputation, his very freedom hung by a thread. Judge Elena Mercer rose from her bench with deliberate grace. Her robes rustled like armor, her gavel firmly in hand. Every eye in the room followed her movements. Every ear strained to catch the first words that would seal the fate of a man who had terrorized countless lives under the guise of authority. "Officer Cross," she began, her voice calm but carrying the full weight of judicial authority, "we are now here to deliver justice. Justice that has been delayed for far too long, but which can no longer be ignored. You assaulted a federal judge this morning. You perjured yourself under oath. And your career of misconduct spans 15 years, affecting hundreds of citizens, often based solely on race. Today, you are held accountable for every action, every abuse, every life you disrupted." Cross swallowed hard, trying to form words, but no sound came. His defense attorney fumbled through his notes, realizing that there was no argument capable of countering the mountain of evidence against his client. Judge Mercer paused for effect, letting the weight of her words settle. "You once asked me if I knew my place. You believed that I, a black woman and a federal judge, would be powerless in the face of your authority. You believed that the badge you wear protected you from accountability. You were wrong. Your arrogance, your hatred, your cruelty, all of it ends today." She gestured to the evidence displayed earlier. The body cam footage, the backup recordings, the complaints spanning 15 years, the charts revealing racial disparities in your arrests, the financial costs of your misconduct, and the testimonies of countless victims. Every piece of evidence you provided through your own actions proves the pattern of abuse that has plagued this department for years. Judge Mercer's voice rose with intensity. "Officer Cross, this is more than a single act of violence. This is a lifetime of betrayal. Betrayal of the public trust, betrayal of the law, betrayal of the oath you swore to uphold. And the law does not forgive those who betray it so systematically." The spectators shifted uneasily, some leaning forward to catch every word, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Reporter cameras clicked silently, capturing every moment for the world to see. The gallery was packed, as news of the courtroom drama had spread quickly. Judge Mercer took a deep breath, setting her gavel firmly on the bench. "Officer Cross, the charges before you are as follows: assault of a judicial officer, a federal felony, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and perjury in the first degree. These charges carry severe penalties, and each one is substantiated by incontrovertible evidence." Cross's defense attorney whispered something inaudible. Cross's hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair, realizing that years of carefully constructed impunity had collapsed in an instant. For 15 years, you have terrorized citizens, ignored the rights of the innocent, and abused the authority entrusted to you. Judge Mercer continued, her voice rising. You have caused financial harm, emotional trauma, and social injustice on a scale most cannot imagine. Today, the law corrects that imbalance. Today, justice is not delayed. Today, justice is served. She lifted her gavel, the polished wood gleaming under the courtroom lights. Officer Cross, I hereby sentence you to the maximum penalty allowed by law. 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Let this serve as a warning to anyone who believes that their badge places them above the law. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cross's knees buckled, and he collapsed into his chair, sobs shaking his frame. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. For the first time, the reality of his actions truly sank in. Judge Mercer's voice softened slightly, but retained its steely edge. But the consequences extend beyond this courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, a federal investigation will review every case you have handled, every complaint filed against you, and every individual affected by your misconduct. Victims who were silenced for 15 years will finally have their day in court. She gestured toward the gallery, her gaze sweeping over the reporters, lawyers, and citizens. This is not just about one man. This is about restoring faith in a system that too often protects those who abuse their power. Today marks the beginning of a new era of accountability, transparency, and justice. Judge Mercer returned to the evidence table and addressed Cross directly. Officer Cross, for the first time, you will experience what your victims felt for years. Powerlessness, vulnerability, fear. Every grandmother, teenager, doctor, and citizen you wronged will now see the law deliver what you denied them. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, before continuing. The federal investigation will not only review your actions, but will extend to the department itself. Policies will change. Officers found complicit will face consequences. Training programs will be redesigned. Body cameras will be mandatory and tamper-proof. Complaints will be taken seriously. The culture of impunity ends now. The courtroom was silent, but the energy was electric. Every observer understood the historical significance of the moment. Judge Mercer's words were not just a verdict. They were a call to action for the justice system nationwide. Officer Cross, she said, lifting her gavel one final time, you believed you could dictate who is safe, who is accountable, and who could be silenced. Today, you have learned your place, and it is no longer at the top of the law enforcement hierarchy. It is in a federal prison cell, where you will serve your sentence under the law's full weight. The gavel struck the bench with a resounding crack, echoing through the courtroom. Cross's sobs intensified, and he sank completely into his chair. Around him, murmurs of relief and vindication spread. Journalists scribbled notes, capturing the historic moment for millions of readers. 6 months later, the repercussions of that day continued to transform the justice system. Officer Cross remained in federal prison, his colleagues under investigation, and the department restructured under federal oversight. 12 officers were terminated, 4 supervisors faced criminal charges, and comprehensive reforms were implemented to prevent future abuses. Judge Mercer's courageous actions became a symbol nationwide. Law schools invited her to speak, community organizations highlighted her leadership, and civil rights groups used her case as a precedent in advocating for police accountability. The courthouse where the assault had occurred was renamed the Justice Mercer Federal Courthouse, with a bronze plaque reading, "Here, justice finally found its voice." Citizens once afraid to report misconduct now felt empowered to do so. Community oversight boards were established, and training programs designed by Judge Mercer emphasized constitutional rights and unconscious bias awareness. The young law clerk, Mara Bennett, who had witnessed the proceedings, was inspired to specialize in civil rights law. She now worked for the ACLU, fighting similar battles across the country. Rodriguez and Thompson, the officers who had enabled Cross's misconduct, were prosecuted and convicted for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Their recorded laughter while watching a federal judge assaulted became a case study in police ethics programs nationwide. Judge Mercer's voice echoed in the hearts of all who witnessed her courage. Justice may be delayed, but when delivered, it is comprehensive, powerful, and undeniable. And Officer Cross, once the symbol of unchecked power, now faced the reality of accountability. His badge, freedom, and reputation were gone, leaving only the cold, unyielding truth that justice is neither blind nor selective. It is relentless, impartial, and inevitable. The courtroom scene, captured on camera, became one of the most watched legal videos in history, shared worldwide as a testament to courage, integrity, and the ultimate triumph of justice over corruption. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the newly renamed Justice Mercer Federal Courthouse, casting golden light on the bronze plaque that now proudly adorned its entrance. Here, justice finally found its voice. The words had become a symbol, a rallying cry for accountability, fairness, and courage across the nation. Inside, the atmosphere was calm but electric as lawyers, citizens, and reporters moved about. The legacy of that historic morning, the day Officer Daniel Cross was held fully accountable for 15 years of misconduct, reverberated through every hallway, every office, and every courtroom. Judge Elena Mercer walked with measured steps down the central hallway, her robes flowing like a mantle of authority. Though she had returned to her regular judicial duties, her presence now carried the weight of history. Every clerk, every attorney, every law student who entered the courthouse knew they were walking in the halls of a woman whose courage had changed the system forever. Voiceover narrating as if speaking to the viewer directly, she would later say in interviews, "Justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about accountability, transparency, and the courage to stand for what is right, even when it feels impossible." 6 months after the landmark trial, the effects of that morning were still unfolding. Officer Cross was serving his 25-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. His once feared presence in the community had vanished, replaced by the stark reality of confinement. He had time to reflect on every life he had touched, every grandmother he humiliated, every teenager whose future he jeopardized, every professional he harassed for no reason other than the color of their skin. Meanwhile, the police department itself underwent a complete transformation. 12 officers were terminated, 4 supervisors faced criminal charges, and federal oversight ensured compliance with new protocols. Officers now wore tamper-proof body cameras, training programs emphasized civil rights, and complaints were no longer dismissed without review. The culture of impunity that had allowed Cross to operate unchecked for 15 years had been dismantled. Back in the courthouse, the 432 cases tainted by Cross's misconduct were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals were released, and hundreds more had their charges reduced. Families once shattered by injustice could now breathe freely again. Their stories, long ignored, became a symbol of what true accountability could achieve. One of these individuals was Jamal Washington, the 17-year-old student falsely accused of drug possession years earlier. Now a college graduate, Jamal stood in the gallery of the Justice Mercer Courthouse, tears welling in his eyes as he watched proceedings addressing the systemic changes implemented after Cross's conviction. "I never thought justice could come for me," he said in an interview. But Judge Mercer showed us that the law isn't just words on paper. It's real, it can protect us, and it can hold even the most powerful accountable. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, now elderly but still fierce in spirit, had her name cleared after her long-dismissed complaint was finally acknowledged. She had waited over a decade for justice, but seeing Cross behind bars brought a sense of closure she never imagined possible. "It's never too late," she told reporters. "Justice will find you if you have the courage to stand for it." The ripple effects extended far beyond individual cases. Across the nation, citizens began demanding similar accountability from law enforcement. Community oversight boards were established, and training programs designed by Judge Mercer were adopted in multiple states. Her curriculum emphasized not just constitutional rights, but also the subtler elements of bias, how even well-intentioned officers could perpetuate injustice if left unchecked. Mara Bennett, the young law clerk who had witnessed the trial, had changed her career trajectory entirely. Inspired by Judge Mercer's courage, she now worked for the ACLU, advocating for civil rights nationwide. Seeing her stand up, knowing what was at stake, and still pushing forward, it changed me, Mara said. I want to be the voice for those who were silenced, the same way Judge Mercer gave us all hope. Even Officer Cross's former allies, Rodriguez and Thompson, faced justice. Their recorded laughter as Cross assaulted Judge Mercer became central evidence in their own prosecution for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. They were convicted and sentenced, their actions studied in police ethics programs across the country as examples of institutional corruption and the dangers of complicity. Judge Mercer, however, did not let the fame of the trial define her. She continued presiding over cases with the same integrity and dedication she had always demonstrated. But her story had become a teaching tool. Law schools invited her to speak, civic organizations hosted her for workshops, and journalists wrote extensively about the precedent her courage had set. The courthouse itself became a symbol. Students and tourists alike would walk past the plaque, reading the inscription aloud. Here, justice finally found its voice. Many left with a renewed sense of faith in the legal system, realizing that even entrenched power could be held accountable when someone dared to confront it. Judge Mercer's message was always clear. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. And in every interview, every lecture, every public appearance, she emphasized the broader lesson. Justice was not a privilege reserved for a select few. It was a right, universal and unyielding. Across social media, the courtroom footage from the historic trial became a viral sensation, viewed over 50 million times. People from around the world shared their own stories of injustice and found solace in seeing a system that could, and did, correct itself. Comments poured in from victims who felt empowered for the first time, inspired to speak out against misconduct in their own communities. The changes in the local community were tangible. Citizens who had long feared law enforcement interactions began reporting misconduct without hesitation. Community programs flourished, teaching young people about their rights and the importance of accountability. Parents felt safer sending their children into neighborhoods once plagued by fear. And for the first time in decades, the public witnessed that unchecked power could be confronted and defeated. Judge Mercer herself became a living emblem of courage. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced an extraordinary test and prevailed. But she also understood that her work was far from complete. Every case she handled, every policy she influenced, every speech she gave reinforced the core principle that justice, when wielded with integrity and courage, can reshape lives, communities, and institutions. As for Officer Daniel Cross, he remained in federal prison, stripped of his badge, pension, and the illusion of power. Every day in confinement reminded him of the consequences of his actions. He had believed he could control the system, intimidate citizens, and act without consequence. He had been wrong. Justice, embodied by Judge Mercer, had caught up with him, and in doing so, it had changed the world around him. The legacy of that day continued to grow. Judge Mercer's curriculum for law enforcement, emphasizing constitutional rights, bias awareness, and accountability, became a national standard. Courts across the country referenced her trial as a pivotal example of how systemic corruption can be challenged and reformed. And perhaps most importantly, the people who had once been silenced, victims, families, and communities, finally found their voices amplified by the law itself. Justice had not only been served, it had been transformed into a movement, one that reminded the nation and the world that no one is above the law, and that courage, integrity, and accountability will always triumph over fear, corruption, and abuse of power. Judge Mercer, standing in the courthouse she helped transform, looked out over the city. She could feel the weight of responsibility, yes, but also the satisfaction of knowing that one decisive act of courage had sparked lasting change. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the prison where Cross served his sentence, the lesson was clear. Actions have consequences, and justice will always find a way. The voiceover concludes, sometimes justice doesn't just wear blindfold. Sometimes justice wears judicial robes. Sometimes it carries a gavel. And sometimes, when the moment is right, justice hits back with unwavering force. Stand up to bullies, protect the powerless, and never forget, the law is on your side if you have the courage to demand it. Share this story if you believe in justice for all, and remember, every act of courage can change the world.